Across the galaxy, there were rules about how you built and repaired warships. Real serious rules. That's how civilized folks did it. Humans did it different. They asked humans to repair it. That was a mistake. By A.J. Moraine. Now here's the thing. Across the galaxy, there were rules about how you built and repaired warships. Real serious rules. You had clean orbital shipyards, junkyards, certified crews, and manuals so thick they needed their own storage decks. Every bolt had a number. Every weld had a tolerance. Every system had a procedure. That's how civilized folks did it. Humans did it different. Funny thing was, it worked. Out on the far edge of Terran space, wrapped around a dead gray moon nobody ever bothered naming, there sat a place most species tried real hard to pretend didn't exist. It didn't show up on official charts, didn't get mentioned in polite conversation, and if you asked a Terran officer about it, they'd usually look off to the side and say something like, now why would you want to go there? It was a junkyard. Not the kind where things were neatly stacked and labeled. This place looked like somebody had taken a few thousand broken ships, shaken them up, and just let them drift wherever they landed. Hull plates floated in clusters, some still scorched black from whatever had tried to kill them. Engines hung off makeshift frames with cables trailing behind like loose thoughts. Half-built ships sat right next to half-destroyed ones, and half the time you couldn't tell which was which. There were a lot of ships in there that had no business being in the same system, much less bolted together. Different species, different technologies, different centuries, all welded into combinations that made engineers from more respectable civilizations quietly reconsider their career choices. And right in the middle of it all was George. Now, George wasn't in charge. Nobody had ever said he was. But if you spent it about 5 minutes in that yard, you started to understand something real important. George didn't need to be in charge. He drifted through that mess like a man walking through his own workshop. He didn't rush, didn't explain, just looked at things, tapped a panel here, adjusted a brace there, and every now and then he'd mutter something like, yeah, that'll do. And somehow it always did. George's pride and joy was an intact battlecruiser that floated in the middle of everything. I was all fancy and put together like it had no business being in a place like that. George had disappeared its crew during a pirate attack on the yard that didn't go so good for them. Around him was a crew that no proper fleet would have signed off on. Old engineers, retired mechanics, folks who had already been told they were done. The only problem was nobody ever showed them how to stop. They worked in clothes that didn't match anything resembling a uniform, tools clipped wherever they fit. Coffee containers floating nearby like they were part of the life support system. Every single one of them looked entirely too comfortable in a place that should have required a warning label just to exist. Most species stayed away from that junkyard. Not because it was illegal, and not because it was especially dangerous. It was because it made them nervous. Nothing in there followed the rules, and anything that didn't follow the rules usually meant humans had been working on it. So when 3 warships came limping in from the edge of known space, trailing atmosphere, hull plates torn open, engines sputtering like they were on their last good idea, they weren't looking for innovation. They were looking for somewhere to not die. Their jump drives were failing. Weapons were offline. Reactor shielding had taken hits that would have ended their service life anywhere else. They had one option left and one place within range. Every officer on those ships knew exactly what it meant when their navigation systems locked on to that location, the Terran junkyard. The admiral stood on the forward deck of the lead ship, watching that debris field grow larger on the main display, and he didn't like it. Not one bit. Confirm. That is the Terran repair facility. There was a pause, long enough to feel like somebody wished the answer was different. Yes, Admiral, if that's what you're calling it. He stared at it another second, then gave a short nod. Very well. He didn't believe it. But war has a way of making bad ideas look like the only ideas you got left. The 3 ships drifted in, slow and careful, like they were afraid the place might notice if they moved too fast. And about that time, the Terrans came out to meet them. 2 figures in worn suits, no markings, no official anything, just tools clipped to their belts, and the kind of relaxed posture that said they weren't worried about a single thing they were looking at. They floated up to the lead ship and looked it over. One of them let out a low whistle. Well, now. The other leaned in a little closer. Y'all been having a rough day. Inside the alien command deck, two officers went real still because they recognized those voices. And that's never a good sign. Slowly, like they already knew this wasn't about to go the way they wanted, they stepped forward. The airlock cycled, and the Terrans came aboard. For a moment, nobody said anything. Then one of the engineers tilted his head and looked at the officer standing across from him. Well, I'll be... The officer closed her eyes for half a heartbeat, like she'd just run into a problem she used to know real well. You. Yeah, the engineer said, with just enough of a grin to make it worse. Been a while. Still purty as ever. That silence right there wasn't technical. That was personal. The officer smiled. If nothing else, he always made her laugh. The admiral looked between them, then back out at the drifting wreckage, then back at the two Terrans. And for the first time since the battle, he hesitated because something about this whole situation felt uncontrolled. But he didn't have a choice. They were losing the war that had been going on for years. Their attackers were relentless. The ships were out of commission, and there was no way they were getting to a proper repair facility. So he straightened up and asked the only question that mattered. Can you repair our ships? Every Terran in that airlock smiled. Not big, not loud, just enough to make them nervous. But if you looked at their eyes, they were lit up like a possum in the headlights. And that right there should have been the first warning. Now the Terrans didn't rush. They didn't panic, didn't ask for manuals, and didn't request a single set of specifications. They just started walking the hulls like a couple of old mechanics looking over a truck that had seen better days. One tapped a panel with the back of his hand, another pulled a section loose and leaned in to look, and a third just stood there quiet, staring at the ship like he was already taking it apart in his head and putting it back together in a way nobody had asked for. One of them finally nodded. Yeah, we can fix them. Now that was all the admiral got. And about that time, the junkyard woke up. Wrecks got open, sections got cut loose, whole chunks of other ships came drifting in from deeper in the yard, pieces that looked like they'd been sitting there for years just waiting for someone to decide they were useful again. Engines that didn't match the original design got bolted into place like they belonged there all along. Weapon housings got reinforced, expanded, and in some cases stretched out farther than they had any right to be. Power lines got rerouted through systems that had never been meant to share energy, and not one Terran stopped to ask if it was a good idea. Now the alien crews tried to keep up. They really did. They followed the Terrans through the ships, watching, recording, asking questions that didn't seem to slow anything down. Why are you removing that system? It is still functional. Yeah, the Terran said, already unbolting it. But it ain't useful. That conduit is not rated for that level of output. Not yet. That mounting point will not support recoil at those levels. It will if we reinforce it. With what? The Terran paused, looked out into the drifting mess of the junkyard, then pointed. We'll find something. Now that didn't help anybody feel better. At one point they cut out a section of hull and replaced it with plating that didn't match anything in the ship's original design. Different alloy, different color, different origin. That material is not standard for this class of vessel. Yeah, the Terran said without looking up. It's better. Now the Admiral started asking for reports, proper ones, structured ones, something he could actually take back to command and explain without sounding like he'd lost control of his own fleet. What he got instead sounded more like opinions than engineering summaries. She'll hold. That ought to work. We'll see. None of those answers made him feel any better. The crews started noticing things they couldn't quite track anymore. Extra emitters appearing along the hull, internal bracing that hadn't been there before, power fluctuations that didn't follow predictable patterns anymore, and then there were the weapon mounts. Those were not part of the original configuration. Yeah, the Terran replied, tightening something that sparked briefly. We noticed. Why have you added more? The Terran looked up at him, completely serious. Balance. Now there was a long pause after that. It was about halfway through the work when George showed up. No announcement, no introduction. He just drifted in from deeper in the yard like he had been somewhere else entirely and decided it was time to take a look. And funny thing was, everything slowed down just a little when he arrived. Not stopped, just adjusted. He moved along the hull of the lead ship with one hand trailing across the surface, not saying a word, just looking. At the damage, at the modifications, at the things the other engineers had already done. Every now and then he'd stop, lean in a little closer, and stare at something for a few seconds longer than felt comfortable. Then move on like he'd made up his mind about something nobody else was in on. One of the other engineers finally glanced over. Well, George didn't answer right away. He made it all the way to the forward section before he gave a single nod. Yeah, he said quietly, I got an idea. Now, nobody asked what that idea was, and that should have told you everything you needed to know. After that, the work picked up speed. Systems came online one by one. Engines spun up with a tone that didn't match anything in the original design. Power started flowing through the ships in ways the alien crews couldn't quite follow anymore. Like the whole thing had been rerouted through logic they didn't understand. Days passed, then a few more, and slowly those 3 broken warships stopped looking like survivors and started looking like something else entirely. When it was finally done, the Admiral called for a full report. He stood there on the command deck waiting for numbers, specifications, performance metrics, something solid he could hold on to. The Terrans gathered near the center of the room, looked at each other, and one of them gave a small shrug. Y'all should be fine. The Admiral stared at him. That is not a report. Another engineer leaned back against a console, arms crossed, completely relaxed. It's the important part. Now, before the Admiral could say anything else, 6 Terrans stepped forward. Older ones, the kind that moved a little slower, but looked a whole lot more certain about everything they were doing. We'll ride along, one of them said, just till y'all get used to the improvements. Now that word hung there a second. Improvements, the Admiral repeated. The engineer nodded once. Yeah. There was a real pause then. A moment where the Admiral considered saying no, considered taking his ships and leaving them exactly as they were, rather than trusting whatever had just been done to them. But war doesn't leave a lot of room for comfort, so he gave a short nod. Very well. The engineers spread out across the ships like they'd always belonged there, taking stations without asking. Settling in like this was just another job. And as the ships prepared to leave, the Admiral took one last look at the Terran junkyard, at the drifting wreckage, at the ships that shouldn't have worked but clearly did, and at George standing off to the side, watching those 3 rebuilt vessels like he was already thinking about what he was going to do next. Something about that whole place felt unfinished, like this wasn't the end of the process, just the beginning. Now, on the way back to the battlefield, things started feeling a little different. Not wrong exactly, just off. The first thing they noticed was the ships didn't hesitate anymore. You gave an input and the ship answered. No delay, no lag, no moment where the system had to think about it. You told it to move, and it moved like it had been waiting on you to say the word. Now, that alone would have been enough to get people's attention. But it didn't stop there. The engines didn't spool up the way they used to. They didn't build toward power. They just responded. Clean, immediate, like somebody had taken all the hesitation out of the system and told it to stop being polite. Weapons came online, smoother than expected, too smooth. Systems that used to require coordination now felt like they were working ahead of the crew instead of behind them. And then there was the target, and now the gunnery crews were the first to notice that something wasn't right there. Because the system didn't just track anymore, it suggested. Target solution available. Now that wasn't standard, not for any system they'd ever used. The Admiral stood at the center of the command deck watching the readouts update in real time, and none of it sat right with him. Every system was reporting stable. Some of them were reporting better than stable. Numbers pushed past what the original design should have allowed, but still marked as within tolerance. That didn't make sense. Now explain these modifications, he said. There was a pause, and that pause told him just about everything he needed to know. One of the Terran engineers finally spoke up. Well, we tuned things. The Admiral didn't move. That is not an explanation. Another engineer leaned back in his seat like he had nowhere else to be. All right, fair enough, short version. He gestured toward the forward display. Your engines, we opened them up a little. The response time is better. Don't be shy with it. We did not request increased engine output. Yeah, the engineer said, but you needed it. Now, that answer didn't sit right, but it wasn't the worst of it. Another Terran tapped a console like he was pointing out something obvious. Target and system's been replaced. Yours was fine. If you like waiting, ours makes decisions faster. The Admiral narrowed his eyes. Defined faster. The engineer shrugged. Fast enough. Now that wasn't comforting. The Admiral shifted his attention. Power distribution has changed. Yeah, another engineer said. We simplified it. It was already optimized. Not like this. Now at this point, the Admiral was starting to realize something important. These weren't answers. These were warnings dressed up like explanations. He let out a slow breath and pointed toward the defensive systems. And the shields? Now that got a little more attention. One of the older engineers leaned forward slightly. Those are different. In what way? The engineer thought about that for a second, then gave a small nod. They hold. Now the Admiral didn't like that answer one bit. That is not sufficient detail. The engineer gave a small shrug. You'll see. Now that phrase right there. Nobody likes hearing that right before a battle. The Admiral turned to another officer. And the fighter compliment? That got a glance between two of the Terrans. They've been adjusted. Adjusted how? Well, the engineer said, scratching his chin. They hit harder now. That is not a measurable statement. It will be. Now the bridge went quiet again. And that kind of quiet, that's the kind that shows up when people are starting to realize they don't understand what's about to happen. The Admiral's gaze shifted one last time to George. Now, George hadn't said much the entire trip, just sat there off to the side, watching the system scroll by like he was reading something nobody else could see. Your modifications, the Admiral said. Explain them. George didn't answer right away. He leaned forward, rested his arms on his knees, and looked at the forward display for a few seconds. Then he spoke. If something gets too close, he paused just long enough to make it worse, we'll deal with it. Now, the Admiral didn't like that answer either. That is not an explanation. George glanced over at him, calm as anything. It's enough. Now that should have bothered him more than it did, because right about then, something else started settling in. Confidence. The systems were stable, the ships were faster, stronger, more responsive, and whatever the Terrans did, it worked. Approaching jump point, the navigation officer said. The Admiral straightened slightly. All ships, prepare for re-entry into combat zone. Acknowledgments came in across the formation. 3 ships, still outnumbered, still walking back into a fight they had barely survived the first time. Nothing about that had changed. Jump in 3, 2, 1. The stars folded, and just like that, they were back. The battlefield stretched out in front of them, enemy fleet already in position, weapons charged, waiting. Now the opposing commander didn't hesitate, didn't question what he was seeing, didn't stop to wonder why 3 crippled ships had come back. He saw an opportunity, and he took it. Fire, and that right there, that should have been the 4th warning. Now the first volley came in hard, no hesitation, no warning, just a wall of fire from half a dozen cruisers that had been waiting on this exact moment. Beams, projectiles, everything they had, all aimed at the lead ship like they were trying to finish what they had started. The Admiral braced for it. He had seen this before. He knew exactly what it looked like when a ship got overwhelmed. Only problem was, that is not what happened. The shields did not break. They did not buckle, and they did not even flicker the way they should have under that kind of pressure. They just took it, calm, steady, like they had been built for exactly this moment. Report, the Admiral said, a little tighter than he meant to. Shields holding, energy levels increasing. Now that got his attention. More fire came in, heavier this time. The enemy commander saw the shields hold and decided to lean into it, pouring more power into the attack, trying to crush them through sheer force. which turns out was exactly the wrong move. 200%, 400, 600. The crew started looking at each other, and that quiet kind of concern began to settle in across the bridge. The engineers, on the other hand, did not look worried at all. One of them leaned forward slightly. "Y'all might want to hold on." 800%. Now the shields changed. They did not collapse. They did not overload. They fired. All that stored energy came back out in one clean, controlled release, focused straight back at two cruisers leading the attack. For just a second, the ships were there, and then they weren't. What remained was drifting ash and a few sparking parts. That was about the moment things started going sideways for the enemy. Because they didn't understand what they were looking at. They just knew two of their cruisers had been erased by something that should not have been possible. And then the fighters launched. They moved too fast, too responsive, like they had been built for something a whole lot meaner than escort duty. One of the alien pilots watched a Terran modified fighter streak past his viewport, and that is when he saw it. The cannon mounted along the nose, too big, too heavy. No business being attached to something that size. "Where did that come from?" he asked. "Trade," one of the Terran engineers said over comms. "With who?" "Friend of mine. Name's Jake." Now that did not mean anything to the pilot, but it should have. The fighter rolled into position, lined up on a cluster of enemy ships, and fired. It was not a clean beam, and it was not a standard projectile. It was messy. The shot hit the center ship, and everything around it started coming apart in a chain reaction that did not follow any known weapons pattern. Ships did not just explode. They tore apart in overlapping bursts, like the weapon had decided one explosion was not nearly enough. Boom balls. Now the enemy formation started to break. Ships pulled back, trying to create distance, trying to understand what they were dealing with. One of their cruisers made a different decision and closed in fast, pushing into boarding range. That was a mistake. George leaned forward just a little, calm as anything, and pressed a control. That cruiser stopped dead. No explosion, no debris, no energy spike. It was just sat there. "What happened?" asked the admiral. "Crew took a leave," George replied. "Where did it go?" one of the officers asked, his voice tight. George did not even look up. "Not here. I'm taking that one home with me." Oh, now panic started to spread across the enemy fleet. Formation broke down, commands overlapped, ships fired when they should not have, moved when they should not have, reacting instead of thinking. And the worst part was they kept shooting, because that is what you do in a fight. You apply pressure, you increase firepower, you overwhelm the target. Only problem was that just made things worse. Every shot they fired fed the shields. Every impact added to the charge. Every attempt to break through just made the next return strike stronger. 400, 600. The engineers did not even bother watching the numbers anymore. 800. Another release. Another two ships gone. It did not take long after that. The enemy fleet tried to scatter, tried to disengage, tried to get out of range of something they didn't understand. But by then, it was already over. The fighters were too fast. The targeting was too precise. The shields punished every attack, and anything that got too close, George dealt with it. Now, within a few hours, the fight was over. 3 ships went in, and only 3 ships came out. For a little while, nobody said much, not on the bridge, not across comms, not anywhere, because there's a kind of quiet that shows up when you realize you just survived something you were not supposed to. The admiral stood there looking out at the wreckage, then slowly turned toward the Terrans. He had one question. "What did you put in my ships?" One of the engineers leaned back, crossed his arms, and thought about it for a second. "Mostly," he said, "spare parts." He paused just long enough to make it worse. "And a few ideas we weren't allowed to test on ours." Now that didn't make the admiral feel any better. Off to the side, George was already moving. Didn't say anything, didn't wait for permission. He just keyed a command. Out in the wreckage, one of the enemy cruisers drifted slightly, then changed direction. Slow at first, then steady. A tow beam snapped into place. "George," one of the engineers said. George didn't even look back. "Taking this one home. Spoils of war." The admiral watched that ship get pulled away, a perfectly intact warship with no crew, and for the first time since the battle, he understood something real important. This wasn't repair, this was multiplication. Soon after the requests started, at first it was quiet. 1 or 2 transmissions, then more, then a whole lot more. Not for ships, for engineers. 2 Terrans per vessel, volunteers only. Now you'd think that'd be hard to fill. It wasn't. Turns out there are a whole lot of Terran engineers who ain't quite ready to sit around and play shuffleboard just yet. And if you ever find yourself flying near Terran space and you see a ship that looks like it was built out of spare parts and bad decisions, you might want to keep your distance. 'Cause odds are it works better than anything you got. And if George built it, well, you probably ain't even going to get the chance to be part of the problem. You'll just be somewhere else.
I hope you enjoyed this story. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Visit my Patreon channel, Sci-Fi Signal 360, for other stories not on YouTube. Drop me a comment and let me know what you would like to see next. You can also purchase ebooks by A.J. Moraine wherever you buy ebooks.